All right, welcome to the Aborisa Experience podcast. My name is Fayomi, and today I have with me Tenjin Ikeda, one of our artists in residence for the upcoming Aborisa Experience, April 24th to 26th in Miami, Florida. Welcome, Tenjin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm good.
Okay.
You know, it's a balmy 40 plus degrees here in New Jersey.
That's warm though for you, actually. Isn't that warm for that's very spring and winter.
Yeah.
It's a little alarming, but we'll take it. I think it's about 67 here, so it's nice. This is considered warm for us. All right, so let's get into it. Again, as I said, you're one of our artists in residence. We're excited to have you display your body of work at the Aborisa Experience. And if you can just tell us a little bit about you, Tenjin the artist. Give us an intro. Give me your elevator speech.
So my name is Tenjin. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York City.
Stand up.
Yeah. Currently living in Jersey, raised by my mother, Ophelia Rodriguez, single parent. Went to school, all my schools, basically in New York City. My mother was born in Puerto Rico, raised there a bit, moved to Spanish Harlem, went back and forth for a number of years. Started drawing when I was a young kid from comics, actually tracing comics. And then, looking at comics, drawing them, then tracing, then doing kind of freehand stuff. And I've always had kind of an interest in it and never really took it kind of seriously. It was just something that I did once in a while, once in a blue moon type thing. As I got older, started becoming more interested in it. And it really wasn't until like high school where we had a college fair, and there was a rep from FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology. And so I spoke to them and he said, "Oh, you needed I needed a portfolio." And I had no idea what a portfolio was. But he said, you could come they do Saturday courses, you can come there. And so that's what I did. I went to FIT on Saturdays. I took graphic design and I took interior design because of those things that I liked. And I built up a portfolio based on that and just drawings that I did. And then eventually went to School of Visual Arts, which I attended. And then I dropped out because I had moved out of my house when I was 17. So just doing the grind, trying to survive and live and all that. I eventually went back, was going to school, full-time, working full-time. Yeah, just doing art. I've worked for artists. I've immersed myself in the art world in New York City, which is a lot different than what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's see. That's a great snapshot of the beginning, basically self-taught. And then, eventually, getting some additional lessons through, the school route. But tell us how your spirituality and your art merged and when, because you are an Aborisa, right?
So I was born and raised in this African spirituality. My mother and oldest sister, my oldest sister is a Lukumi priestess of Eshu or Legba, and my mother was a priestess of Obatala. She got initiated when I was 5. So I was raised in a form of this tradition, Orisa practice, since I was a kid. The women in my mother's family were spiritualists in Puerto Rico. And I remember my first trip going to Puerto Rico, one of my mother's aunts had like a kind of misa, as they called, like white table. It was just her, my mother, and this woman that kind of helped her out. And so it was just something that I was always raised in. So there's that saying of we stand on the shoulders of those that come before us. But that was something that was never told to us. It was just something that was shown to us.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
And so, my mother was considered the quote unquote African one. Because, she wore a lot of times like traditional wear. She was very kind of grounded in that. And this is kind of what she taught me. And it wasn't really until I would say probably in my early 20s that kind of that spiritual aspect kind of started to merge in my work. And at the time I was painting a lot more, painting on wood. I was working for an artist. And that's when it slowly kind of started to emerge, kind of bridging the gap between ancestors, that idea of those who have come before us, which is very much always on my mind when I create. So it's been always a constant thing. And I think it came out more when I started printmaking, which is kind of what I've been doing for the past 20 plus years. And because there's also a tradition of relief printing amongst Black people. It's very connected to carving, that kind of thing. And so it's been about 20 plus years that I kind of started to merge those two. And it wasn't necessarily a conscious thing. It was just a very fluid, natural thing that just happened.
That's dope. Okay. Now, tell us about your process. Like when you create, are you receiving messages and then you're inspired to work? Or like, do you come up with a concept and then it evolves as it goes? What is your process?
So my process is usually, it's conversations, it's dreams, dialogues in my head, things that I see. And it's almost like, I kind of look at it as like collage work in a sense. And even for me, the finished products the finished pieces that, end up being what they are. It's just taking these kind of very abstract ideas and merging them together. I used to, I do very little sketching. I used to sketch a little bit more, but even with that, it never really translated. Sketching for me was just like a means to get maybe an idea out. And then once I started on the piece, maybe an aspect of it stayed, but it would eventually always change.
Okay.
So yeah, it comes from different sources, and mostly my practice of Orisha and just Africa in general. I just have this deep connection to it, even without knowing a lot of it. A lot of its history, in terms of Africa, but that idea of like indigenous, natural, nature-based connection is just something that's just a part of me.
Right.
So I approach it that way, so I put elements of those things in my work. But I'm also a person who grew up in a city, so there's that too. But really, if you look at the pieces, really they're more kind of I guess spiritual in nature.
Right. It's very organic. When I see the work, it's like nothing else I've seen, but it seems familiar at the same time, And it's funny because I'd seen your work many times. I have books that I believe you've done artwork for before we met. And seeing your work, I'm like, wait, it does look familiar because he's been doing this forever.
Yeah.
Like a book from 20 years ago. I'm like, wait, this is Tenjin's work. This is, so that consistency, and it's just your way of life. It's, obviously it's like, I guess you couldn't create anything else because it's you. It's an extension of you.
And for me, like I've tried to approach work in a very kind of academic way, and it never works. It just never works. So I just, over the years, I've just learned to just kind of go with it.
Right. Okay. Now, as far as the actual process with the woodwork, you said you don't sketch much. Do you start on the wood and just see how it goes? Do you always intend to create prints?
So I work mostly in linoleum. Mm-hmm. I've also done wood cut. Mm-hmm. And the process is just usually the same. I draw directly on there. Mm-hmm. For me, it's like sketching it's a wonderful thing. It's a great thing to kind of train yourself, but it's also kind of a nuisance. So for me, it was just, like after doing it for so long, it's like, let's just draw on the piece itself. Let's just not, because otherwise it's kind of like you're trying to control the outcome in a way. Right.
You might not ever get to the linoleum if you don't start directly on it. It's like
So I'll just draw on it, and I know, again, after doing it 20 plus years, I know like if I want, say, a particular image to print out a certain way, I just need to do it in the reverse.
Right.
So it means I'll probably trace it and then transfer it on and do it that way so that it comes out the way I want.
Right.
But yeah, I just I've let go of the idea that it needs to be a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm free to create on there. And a lot of it I draw, but most of it is very spontaneous. So like a lot of the texture and the cutting is not really planned. It's just what happens, what comes to me. Yeah, I work very intuitively just in my work.
Okay.
If I may plan like, I like these sculptural figures, I'll put them in, but I don't know what the surface of that's going to look like. And when I think of like, okay, like this last piece that I did, I think about carving. What does carving look like on wood? What are the stages of carving on wood look like? How do I kind of reflect that texture? And that's kind of how I approach certain things.
Okay, now that kind of leads me into my next question. So you're very intuitive when you work. Do you feel like a spiritual connection while you're working? Do you feel like, are you receiving messages? Is it like visual or Reiki? Are you, is it shape shifting as you're creating? What does that look like for you?
I'm just really immersed in it, and I'm really focused in it, and I don't think too much about it, and it just comes through. Mm-hmm. And also there's kind of a battle that goes on with me when I work, in terms of the image, because I'll draw something, and I'll draw something and I'll start to just cut into it, right? And I'll know while I'm doing it that this is going to take a very long time to get the effect that I went for, really. I'm not even trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. It's just something I just did. And so there's a battle of like, okay, why did you do this? This is going to take forever. But I just continue to do it. It's really not a conscious thing for me. It's just like, I just work, I immerse in it. It just comes through me. There is no thought of like, I'm going to do this now. A lot of the kind of patterns and designs that I did, if you look at like kind of earlier stuff really earlier stuff that I've done, like I see the link, like I can see the progression of my work, and just also how it connects with everything that I've done before. There's only like certain specific things, like if I'm working on a face, like I do think of drawing and how light hits a surface, and like, so I try to I'm conscious of that. But in terms of being in the process, I'm just in it.
Nice. Okay.
And, and I spend, I could spend like 2 hours on a section that's like 3 inches wide, depending on how detailed.
Right. I remember seeing a piece just recently, probably towards the end of last year, with the cowrie shells.
Yeah.
How long did that take to?
So there's probably and it doesn't look like it, but there's probably like 150 cowrie shells.
Wow.
And and that's one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, cowrie shells.
That's nice. Yeah.
And then it's like,
oh, cowrie shells.
What are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, that probably took about a week to do.
Just the shells.
Just the shells, because first you have to draw it, and I try to draw it as close to as I want to see it, but I know that, again, just from doing as long as I have, I know that the cutting is going to add the texture and the look that I want.
Right.
So I don't have to worry too much. I just need enough references to, like, if you look at cowrie shells, there's like these kind of ridges on the inside of the shell. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just the shape of it. So, drawing it, it just starts off as oval shapes, and then you kind of shape it a little bit more. That could take like a few days just to do that. And then about a week. It depends on, like, am I in the groove, and, what kind of groove I am. And again, those battles of like, okay, I've had enough of this. I've been sitting here for 3 hours, and then it's like, I got to stop, but then like I'll continue more, and then another hour goes by, and
So this battle between Tenjin and Tenjin.
I haven't surrendered.
Okay, so say for instance that particular piece in its entirety, how long did it take to create the entire piece?
So I want to say probably about a month.
Wow.
Yeah, just because the advantage or disadvantage of just kind of fluidly working, I don't really know, and so the drawing is there, but it's like, okay, what do you? I wanted to, in a sense, kind of look like what it is, but also give it a certain texture, and it just has to have a certain look to it. So I don't really. So I think so. If there's hands, so I used to paint a lot of hands. For me, hands are very important. I mean, I work with my hands, obviously, but this idea of like working, creating, hard work, using your hands to form something. So I think about light hitting the hands. I think about the texture of your hands, the veins in your hands, the wrinkles in your hands, how to execute that. How does that work in fabric? Like folds and shadows, and none of that is in the drawing at all. That's just all in my brain. This is just a conversation in my brain. I used to a little bit kind of put that information of shadowing and stuff like that, but now it just becomes like I'll put like an X or I'll squiggle something so I know like, okay, in this area I need to achieve this, whatever that is, and however I decide to cut it, because you can cut or carve in so many different ways to achieve the same thing.
Right. So as an artist, what do you feel is your mission or purpose?
So I think it's important. I think it's important to be represented, and especially when it comes to Black people in traditional arenas. We there's this constant thing about like, the past is the past. It has no relevance. It has no significance. But I don't ever buy that or believe that at all.
Me either.
Because it's the foundation.
Exactly.
You don't have to necessarily live like people in the past, but like without that connection, you're nothing.
Exactly.
At all. So it's a very fundamental thing for me, that representation, that you visually see me. Like, I don't care what you say or what you tell me I'm supposed to do or not do. Like, you're going to see me. And you're going to see a part of me that you deem ancient or old or evil or whatever the words are. And you're going to see that, and it's going to be okay. And you're going to be okay, whether you like it or not. But yeah, it's just for me. It's everything. It really is. It's just like it's always a thought in my brain about, like, even if I'm not creating, just like, what about these people? What about this culture? What about my people? What about my culture? What about, again, even if I don't have all this information, it's just a constant thing about showing that, being that, speaking that. And so it's just something that I have to do, whether people love it, or whether people don't love it. I've gone through that too as an artist. It's like, oh, well, and I'm not this, or I haven't done that. And it's, at some point it's just like, well, the hell with it. Like, right. You might as well just do your work.
Yes. Just be authentic. And
yeah. And that's just kind of where I am. Like, I make images based on dialogues in my head for the most part, and conversations in my head, and some conversations with people. Because, the idea that beauty is a certain thing, or, being a Black person is a certain thing, or whatever. And, that's fine for if, you subscribe to that. But I just think it's really important to show and represent, and also that we come from a spiritual tradition.
Right.
and that it's valid. And that it's valid, it's important, it's a foundation. It's the foundation for even the stuff Black folks are doing today, even in other spiritual traditions. And, there was a reason to try to destroy it.
Exactly.
My thing is just, without being kind of, rah, 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 or whatever about it, I create the work.
No.
And, hopefully it's received well, or, someone gets something out of it, or there's a spark in someone's heart or mind. Or
I can definitely resonate with that. Now, in particular to the Aborisa Experience, it's important that we have you join in on this project because of exactly what you said. Like, there's a lot of there's a lot of, antiquated artwork and images, and people think that it's something that's old and, ancient in West Africa. But there are you and many other artists that are also continuing to lend to that narrative through the visual arts, continuing to depict, West African Orisha tradition through your art. Now, as an artist, you're saying it comes to you because it's been something you've been around and it's just a part of you. But do you feel a sense of responsibility to play your role in that continuity?
Yeah, actually, just because that's how it was. That's how my mother just gave it to us. Like, when I think of my mom, I think she was a single parent doing things that weren't necessarily embraced even by our family. I mean, like when she was called the African one, I mean, that was by people in our family.
Right.
Again, this whole internalized racism just because they're from Puerto Rico. And it's like, well, our colonizers spoke Spanish.
Exactly.
That's it.
That's what it boils down to.
That's all that happened.
Exactly.
Like, you're no different.
No gold coin or ticket for that. Like.
Exactly. So, and so when I think about that, and again, she never pushed anything. It was just like, this is what we're doing. This is, just like I was just dragged everywhere. And even though it was a specific Orisha tradition that she was a part of, she was very clear about where it came from, what it stemmed from. And that's what she showed. And so, naturally, it's just something, even though, as a kid, I grew up and in it and all, and then I kind of went my own way and I did other stuff. And it wasn't until probably about in my 20s that I started, like, dreams started happening and I encountered people who were part of Orisha traditions, different kinds. And that I just kind of, in a sense, went back home. And so, I don't specifically look at what I do like just kind of Orisha in a sense, but it's definitely there. The ancestral part is just definitely there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's important. It's important for me to kind of show that, it's definitely important. And also show it in a way that's just not like kind of cartoon characters.
Exactly.
Like we get into these stories about what Shango is or Shun is, and that's okay if, to a certain degree, just because people are visual or they like, but beyond, like what happens beyond that?
Exactly.
And I'm interested in what happens beyond that.
Right.
And how, so for me, it's like, well, how can I take those concepts and ideas and create a certain narrative, a certain visual aesthetic that's just not, like Shango's got an axe or, Shun's got voluptuous shape, or that's just not just that.
There's so much more depth to it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That it's also part of who we are, that it's also part of the natural world, that it's also like, you just can't have this static thing that's just out there. Mm-hmm. Because, and then for me, it's just like, well, then what meaning does it have for you and your life and how you live your life and how you go about relating to people? And so without that, like, what's the point?
Exactly.
But it's just kind of how I feel. So, and again, I'm a city kid, even though I love nature. So just have hints of that here and there.
All right. So I'm going to close with asking you, we have 3 terms that are essentially what the Aborisa Experience is based upon. And I want you to tell me your first thoughts with each word. So the first one is tradition.
Foundation.
Okay. Practice.
Essential.
Continuity.
Without it, you're lost. Yeah, it's just all of that's important. It's important to like, it's just important to own. For me, all those 3 are. It's about you, like the individual, like, and it's a way to advocate for yourself and cheer yourself, on and love on yourself. To be grounded in all that and to not take it for granted. And it's like investing in yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? Because if you don't do that, then you're kind of in a deficit. And then who else really? And even if people are like cheering you on, and if you don't really believe it in yourself,
right? Yeah. Awesome.
So.
Well, thank you very much for your time. We're excited to see your body of work at the Aborisa. As I said before, you are one of the artists in residence, so the gallery on site will showcase your work. And you're also going to be doing an artist talk. So this is just a little snapshot for people to get an idea of who you are, the artist, and understand your process as we highlight you at this upcoming event.
Sounds great. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me for this interview, being part of the whole project.
Yes. Oh, and
I'm excited.
And we are excited as well. And your artwork on the digital flyers, everyone loves it. So it's hopefully you're saving a little something special for us to see that we haven't seen there. Hint, hint,
yes.
Nudge, nudge.
Yes.
But tell us about.
Stop showing work.
You will have some merch on sale at the event. Do you have an idea of now, so we can kind of put our coins aside? What will you have available for purchase?
I have prints. I have like just a lot of artwork. I do have a T-shirt that I printed and like a bag that I printed. But yeah, that's kind of what I have.
Okay.
Like small prints, large prints.
Awesome. Okay.
Reasonable.
Invest in art. All
yes.
right. Well, thank you so much, Tenjin. You have a great rest of your day. We look forward to speaking with you soon again.
Well, thank you. You enjoy your day as well.
Thanks.